As I see it, Discovery has three main purposes. One is to spark new ideas and stimulate dialogue. This year, we are especially excited to bring you a keynote presentation from senior faculty at Silicon Valley's Singularity University, Salim Ismail and Brad Templeton, who will be more formally introduced in a moment. Silicon Valley returns to the main stage tomorrow with a keynote via closed circuit from one of the region's founders, gurus, and godfathers, Steve Blank. Harvard Business Review recently declared him one of the 12 masters of innovation alongside Thomas Edison and Clayton Christensen. As you will see in your pocket agenda, which looks sort of like this, we have some fascinating panel discussions and competitions planned through the next 2 days. Of course, another central purpose of Discovery is to be a great place to do business. For the first time, we have assembled a group of top business leaders from some of Canada's most successful companies to talk about future directions for their business, their innovation objectives, and where they see opportunities for collaboration in R&D and in their supply chain. This is an extraordinary opportunity to gain some business intelligence that could open new doors and opportunities for your own companies and research. You will also have an opportunity to rub shoulders with more than 100 venture capitalists and angel investors, eager to identify and fund the next big thing. Take advantage of wherever popular Ask an Expert session to help you connect, or use Connect at Discovery to link directly with the targets of your choice. You can also meet our international delegates from India, Switzerland, and Finland, and most notably, a large delegation from China representing over 95 major companies, investors, and senior government officials keen to connect with Ontario companies across all sectors. And speaking of doing business, I want to especially welcome our colleagues from SWAN, the Ontario Network of Entrepreneurs, including the regional innovation centres. You will see an impressive display of innovative companies from across Ontario on the show floor, including 27 companies from Northern Ontario. The last but not least mission of Discovery is to introduce you and welcome youth to the exciting and rewarding world of innovation and entrepreneurship. This year, we have more than 100 young companies emerging from universities and colleges across Ontario in our Young Entrepreneurial Zone, which is sponsored by OMERS. We are also delighted to welcome finalists for our elevator and investor pitches, the David McFadden Energy Entrepreneurship Challenge, and our 19 finalists from high schools across the province in the Young Entrepreneur Make Your Pitch competition. And 16 companies who are looking to hire are meeting with our young bright minds in the career zone to talk about future opportunities. We want to do all we can to help young people gain the valuable entrepreneurial and real-world work experience that they need to succeed. I would now like to introduce Jonathan Simmons, OMER's Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, to say a few words. OMER's significant support for Discovery has been greatly appreciated. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I just had a report from Google. There have just been 2,000 hits on its website searching for Genghis Khan. I will be doing my search after the meeting today. But I'm proud to be here today on behalf of OMERS. OMERS is an acronym. It stands for the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System, and we're proud to be a sponsor of the event today. At OMERS, we are one of Canada's largest pension plans with over $65 billion of net assets. And our primary goal is very clear. Our job is to ensure that the people who serve in our communities here in Ontario can retire knowing that their pensions will be paid. And I'd like to salute OCE today, its staff, your leadership, your board, for your outstanding work. So, what does a pension plan like OMERS and OCE have in common? Well, for one thing, we both believe that Ontario can and should be a leader globally when it comes to science, technology, and innovation. And some of you will be familiar with OMERS already because you've read about what we're doing on the investment front around the world. But let me make it absolutely clear. As one of our former CEOs often said, and he's here today, we won't forget that the O in OMERS stands for Ontario. And at OMERS, we're very interested in Ontario, whether that be through our real estate arm, Oxford Properties, which is a real estate company which is very much focused on sustainability and employing innovative techniques to ensure that our real estate operations are and continue to be sustainable into the future. Or through OMERS Ventures, our venture capital ring. Your Excellency, you'll be pleased to know that OMERS has allocated $400 million to venture capital in the technology space. It's a small step, but it's a beginning. Or whether it's through Borealis Infrastructure, our infrastructure arm, which is a major investor here in Ontario in the Bruce Nuclear Power Station, the world's largest nuclear power generating facility, and one that recently was involved in a project to restart a number of the reactors. That required tremendous innovation right here at home in this province. And I could go on for a while telling you about OMERS and telling you about OCE, but I'll share with you one brief example of why OCE is close to my heart. I serve as a director of the Canadian Youth Business Foundation. That organization provides business coaching, startup financing, and mentoring to young Canadians to help them start businesses. We support young entrepreneurs. And last May, at this conference, CYBF and OCE signed a partnership agreement for a 3-year term. I'm pleased to say that that has now been formalized, and CYBF now provides a fast-track mechanism for fellows of OCE to get access to more finance, to more information, and to our business mentoring system. And we hope that that will be beneficial to all of you in this room who have aspirations to start your own businesses. But back to the matter at hand. This fantastic event today, this Discovery 2014. I want to wish all of you, every participant, a great and productive conference. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for what you've done. And please keep innovation moving in Ontario. And now I'd like to hand over to Debbie Fischer, OCE board member, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. As many of you know, last year we began our connection with Singularity University when we had its co-founder, Peter Diamandis, here as our keynote speaker. And we're pleased today to build on that relationship with our double bill keynote session today. We're going to be introducing to you shortly Salim Ismail, Global Ambassador and Founding Executive Director of Singularity University, and Brad Templeton, Networks and Computing Chair at Singularity University. Both are proud Canadians and graduates of University of Waterloo. No applause? Okay. Salim Ismail is a highly sought-after speaker, strategist, and entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley. He spent the last 4 years building Singularity University based at NASA Ames, and before that built and ran Brickhouse, Yahoo's internal incubator. His last company, Angstro, was sold to Google in August 2010. He has built 8 startups and has also lived in 8 countries for over a year, so he brings a strong international perspective to his startups. Brad Templeton is an internet entrepreneur, futurist lecturer. He is the developer of self-driving cars and lectures and blogs about the emerging technology of automated transportation. An expert in copyright law and political and social issues related to computing networks, he was the chairman of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He was also founder, publisher, and software architect at Clarinet Communication Corps, which in the 1990s became the first internet-based business, creating an electronic newspaper, a Canadian-based company. You'll see that there are opportunities for you to ask many questions today. I want to advise you that you can be thinking about your own questions for keynotes and either ask them at one of our mics on the floor or submit them via our mobile event guide. Once you've logged on, visit the polls and feedback section and click on opening remarks and keynote address. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome Salim Ismail and Brad Templeton.
Ladies and gentlemen, just before we hear from Brad and Salim, I'd ask you to please rise for the departure of His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor-General of Canada. Thank you.
All right. Welcome, everyone. And first of all, thank you for OC and Discovery for having us here. This is such an important event. I'm going to touch on a few remarks as to why we think it's so important. We're hitting an inflection point in the world in a way that we've never seen before. And I'm going to talk through some of what we're seeing and why this is such a critical time and why specifically Ontario has such an important role to play. We've talked through a little bit about my background. There's my Twitter handle. I am a Waterloo graduate, barely. I went through the co-op program, and one of the issues with that program is you learn very quickly that what you're working on out in your work terms has nothing to do with what you're studying back at school. And so it demotivates the heck out of you, and then you have to really struggle. And my marks kind of steadily dwindled right down to the end. And I scraped through, I think, on the behalf of David Johnston's gratitude, or get him out of there as fast as possible. I've spent 10 years in Europe restructuring large European companies, which is why I'm bold. And I think if you spend time in Europe, you'll probably understand that. Even harder to restructure Canadian companies, European companies than Canadian ones. And I've spent the last decade or so in the US and Silicon Valley specifically, building out first Yahoo's incubator and then doing a few startups there. Peter Diamandis spoke here a year ago. He's our chairman and co-founder at Singularity. How many of you were here last year? Can I just see a show of hands? So quite a few of you, many of you will remember his talk. He touched on three elements. The first, exponential technologies and some of the power that we're seeing there. Secondly, XPRIZE and what we can do with incentive competitions. And thirdly, the shift from scarcity to abundance. We're going through this inflection point today, and I'm going to talk through a little bit of what we're seeing. As was mentioned, as Debbie mentioned, we're based at NASA Ames. There are 10 NASA centers around the country in the US. And at Ames is where they do all of the R&D and supercomputing for all of NASA. And we have access to some of that research. That curve is the one thing not to forget in terms of how we think about the world. We look at this price performance of Moore's law as you think about it. And we've looked at this extraordinary pace of change over the last 50, 60 years. Ray Kurzweil plotted that all the way back to 1900 and found that we've been steadily doubling the price performance of computing for over 100 years. And he asked the question when he saw this data, why is that curve so smooth and so predictable? We've had wars, recessions, ups and downs in the semiconductor industry. This thing is moving like clockwork, right? Doesn't make sense. And he spent about a decade doing research on this, trying to understand why. And his fundamental observation at the end of that was that once you take a domain or a discipline or an industry area and you base it in information properties and power it with information flow, its price performance starts doubling very steadily every year or so. And once on that path, nothing shakes it off that path. It stays on that doubling pattern. And when you add up all of the technologies that we're seeing going through this pace, the results are fairly mind-boggling. This is our founding conference 5.5 years ago. We brought together 60 or so thought leaders around Silicon Valley, and we asked the question, is it worth creating an educational institution only focused on accelerating technologies? And the observation that was made there is that many of the biggest problems that we're facing in the world today, the spread of pandemics or aspects of climate change, or the financial crisis that we're all struggling under, they're rooted in accelerating factors and exponential factors, right? The spread of a pandemic is exponential. I give it to 2 people, you give it to 4 people, and it goes geometric from there. The financial crisis, driven by the acceleration in the underlying derivatives and other instruments. And our leadership around the world, business or political, does not have a good handle on this. And our essentially mission statement is to educate a new generation of leadership that understands this pace of exponential change and how could you leverage that and harness that to solve the biggest problems in the world. By the way, in that photograph, there's about 12 Canadians out of the 60 there, and there's an extraordinary representation of Canadians there. So we've been looking at all of these technologies and seeing that we're seeing extraordinary disruption across each one. This afternoon, when Brad and I do our separate sessions, we'll delve a little bit more into those technologies. I'll touch on them briefly here, but we have gathered together the world's leading experts across all of these areas to come and talk and teach and see what they're looking at. Vint Cerf, who created the IP address system, Craig Venter, who sequenced the very first genome 12 years ago. And essentially, they are all seeing at the edges of their field this extraordinary disruption. And so being able to, with their peers, look at the adjacent spaces is interesting for them. And I mentioned our mission statement is to leverage this acceleration to solve the biggest problems. Because for the first time in the history of humanity, we have several technologies all moving at this pace. And it's the biggest lever that we've ever seen in humanity that the world has ever known. And so if we can harness that pace of change, it becomes the higher order bit and everything else pretty much gets washed away. Mobile phones, we've seen exponential growth in mobile phones, doubling every year from 100 million in the year 2000 to now almost 6 billion out in the world, right? What could we have done if we had harnessed that pace of change early on and layered solutions on top of it? Here's one of the companies we challenge our students to come up with ideas that would impact 1 billion people within 10 years. Every summer we do a summer program, graduate program for average 30 years old students, and they come and live with us at NASA. Half the summer we give them a kind of a briefing on where these technologies are going, what is the future of all of these technologies, and then we ask them to form a team and build out a crazy idea. So this team is looking at 3D printing meat in a petri dish, because it's ecologically much more efficient than hacking it out of the side of the cow. The cow is also a lot happier if you can do that. And it tastes terrible today. Our joke is the taste is doubling every year. We'll see how that works out. This team was looking at poverty a couple of years ago, and they noticed that all the roads in Africa get washed out during the wet season. 85% of all the roads disappear. And how do you alleviate poverty if you can't move anything around? Chris Anderson from Wired magazine came in to do a talk on drones. You've all seen these quadcopter things. And they had the idea to use drones to deliver medicine and food around. This is a live test from Haiti a few months ago. Interestingly about these drones, you can carry today a 2-kilo package about 8 kilometers or 10 kilometers. That's the range. But the underlying technologies are moving so fast, they're doubling in their capability every 9 months. So by the end of this year, 4 kilos, by the middle of next year, 8 kilos, and now things get really interesting. We've already had a phone call from FedEx, a bit nervous, saying, hey, what are you doing over there? And you may have seen this announcement from Amazon that they want to deliver drones, deliver packages using drones. This was inspired by some of the work that we've been doing. This, by the way, was a complete fraud. They have no such capability, but they managed to get the story out on 60 Minutes the day before Cyber Monday. So their PR people have had a huge bonus as a result. And for us, we love it because it legitimizes the space, right? It has a lot of people start thinking about it. And even if this idea doesn't work, you can see it'll inspire a whole new way of thinking about the problem. And that's what we're also trying to do. We also run one-week executive programs. How many alumni do we have here in the audience? Can I see a show of hands? You can recognize them. They're a little sleepless. We also call Sleepless University because of the density of our programs. And this is a program that we do with Deloitte, where they bring 75 or 80 Fortune 500 CEOs to us for 4 days, a couple of times a year. And we ask these CEOs beforehand, what awareness do you have about these technologies? And most said, we've never really heard about these. At the end of the 4 days, we asked them, how big of an impact do you think this will have? 100% agreed that it would have a game-changing impact within 5 years, and 80% said that would happen within 2 years. That's the gap that we're trying to bridge. Beforehand, most people don't know about these breakthroughs in these technologies, but afterwards, 80% think game-changing impact within 2 years, right? And 100% had an urgent action item the minute they got back to the office. And that's essentially why we exist. This is probably the most interesting attribute of our model. Because we're focused on fast-moving technologies, we actually update our curriculum very frequently. Before every time we run a program, we actually revisit every lecture. So we've had to develop almost a real-time curriculum development process to keep pace with this pace of change. So that's a little bit about Singularity. Let me run through what we're seeing out in the world and what the implications are. The first and most obvious is we're digitizing the world, right? All of our memories aren't in our heads anymore, they're in our smartphones. All our communications today are digital. All our relationships are digital via social networks, etc. If you're below 30 years old, the appearance of your Facebook profile is much more important than how you're dressed that day, right? And we can tell by how they're dressing these days that that's really the case. And as we hop, once something becomes digital, it hops onto that exponential bandwagon and starts doubling very steadily, and we're seeing that explosion take place. The favorite analogy that I have for describing this is photography. Some of you are old enough to remember film photography, right? And you're operating, when you do film photography, you're operating from a scarcity model. You can only carry so much film around. It costs about $1 a photograph to get it processed, and the cost of the film takes some time to get the film processed, et cetera. When you when you change the substrate from a material substrate to a digital substrate, and you shift from film photography to digital photography, two things happen. The first is the marginal cost of an extra photograph goes to zero. Right? You can now take 1,000 more photographs and just keep the ones you want. It doesn't cost you anything extra. The second, and more importantly as a result of this, is the domain explodes. In 1996, there was about three-quarters of a billion photographs processed that year, film photographs processed that year around the world. Today, we are uploading per day 3/4 of a billion photographs up to Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, et cetera, and you can see that domain totally exploding. Now we have billions of photographs out there, maybe too many, and now we have an abundance problem. Now the question is, how many different copies do I have of all my photographs across all my different devices? Where did I put the chip? Did I share these, et cetera, et cetera? And we changed the domain space pretty significantly. And this explosion of going from film photography to digital photography, this analog, is essentially what we're saying across all of these technologies. And when you add those up, the aggregate result is quite profound. And of course, once you have something in a digital environment, you can apply modeling and machine learning and simulation and correlation, and that drives the pace of change even further. We're seeing that today in 3D printing. Many of you are familiar with this technology. We've essentially now information-enabled manufacturing, and there are two inflection points in 3D printing that have it accelerate. The first is you can make things like the object on the top right that can't be molded. That has to be assembled. No mold can manage that. Yet a 3D printer can spit that out. And that's kind of an interesting thing to be able to do. The second, and more important in 3D printing, is that in manufacturing, it's always been true that a more complex object costs more. The design, the fabrication techniques, the materials, et cetera. With 3D printing, for the first time ever, complexity is free. The 3D printer, just like your inkjet printer, does not care if you're spitting out a single letter or a very complex image. The 3D printer doesn't care what shape you're printing out, it's just throwing out the ink or material. And those two inflection points have this technology accelerated fairly dramatically. Here are some of the shapes that you can make. Many of you are familiar with this. I won't touch heavily into this, but this is the winning entry out of the TechCrunch Disrupt contest a couple of days ago. This Harvard graduate is taking inkjet printing cartridges and creating makeup out of it. You buy a $300 printer, and essentially you can make makeup and manufacture it at home to whatever color combination you want as you wish. So this is now going to threaten heavily the entire cosmetics industry, which all of their old business models and supply chains are going to be done pretty. And this is like one or two people in a lab in Harvard, right? Pretty extraordinary stuff that you can do. Another technology that we look at very heavily, and maybe the most powerful that we've seen in a long time, is biotech and bioinformatics. When you learn a new language, which is essentially the language of life, you learn how to read, and then we do comprehension, and then we do writing, right? We've learned how to read DNA profoundly well over the last couple of decades. It cost $2.7 billion to sequence the first human genome 12 years ago. It cost about $400 million to do the next one, about $50 million to do the third, about $14 million to do the fourth. Today, it's down to $1,000. We've gone from $2.7 billion to $1,000 in about a decade, right? It's almost an order of magnitude change per year. And how do you build a business with the price point changing that aggressively? Right? And now we're kind of reading and sequencing every single life form that we can find. It's bringing up all sorts of interesting moral dilemmas. The giant panda is alive because it looks cute. We can now sequence its genome. Should we let it go extinct? Should we store its habitat? How do we handle that? And so we're starting to encounter some really interesting ethical and moral implications, because as these technologies explode in their capability, that's the biggest question. How do you handle the morals and ethics around all this? And that's partly the reason why we exist, is to examine those questions. Now we're starting to understand, if you have a heart attack, they will give you Plavix, a blood thinner. If you have a particular gene, you need a triple dose of that drug to have it be effective. Or if you have perfect pitch in music as a singer, that's actually governed by a single gene. This is a team working on the woolly mammoth. We're about 2 years away from a real woolly mammoth wandering around. It'll be a little confused when it shows up. Its habitat will have changed fairly significantly. But now we're starting to learn how to write, right? And as we start to learn how to write DNA and manipulate it in the same way we do software engineering, essentially now we're playing literally with the fabric of life forms, and how will we handle that? This is a photograph from the iGEM competition. Teams of college students are getting together to hack DNA in interesting ways. These guys have taken a glow-in-the-dark substance, crossed it with the DNA of a cat. You can buy this pet that glows in the dark, right? The cat's not very happy about it. It can't hide anymore. But pretty extraordinary stuff that you can do. This is an open space, open source biohacking space in Silicon Valley. The girl in the middle there is 8 years old, and she's leading the class. It turns out she's really good at synthesizing DNA. She knows how to hold a pipette at the right angles. She's teaching the adults how to do it. And she has no moral kind of concept or grasp of what she's really up to, but she's actually manipulating life forms, right? And how will we deal with that? And how do we instill in her that generation the appropriate use and the responsible use of these technologies? I grew up hacking PCs. The kids today are programming the internet. I have a 3-year-old. He'll be hacking the family dog, right? Or me if I'm not careful. And how will we deal with this, right? This is an artist who can pick up a cigarette butt, and by looking at the DNA on the cigarette can recreate the face of the person that smoked it. Right? Pretty extraordinary stuff. Here she's creating a picture of herself. And there's a whole company that's sprung up making mugshots for the police based on DNA found at crime scenes. I'm sure the NSA is all over this in terms of what you could do with this. Now, we're all leaving DNA wherever we go, on glasses, on doorknobs, on the clothes that we wear. And as the cost drops drastically, how will we handle it? And this is the inflection point, right? Peter mentioned this last year. Craig Venter, 3 years ago, created the first fully artificial life form. And the parent DNA of this bacteria is an email file. That's a pretty big inflection point. The world will never be the same again. We're going to see organisms that never existed in nature. And how will we handle the deal with this? In robotics, you've all seen the kids playing with these $20 helicopters. 4 years ago, that same capability cost $700. And 8 years ago, it wasn't possible. That level of miniaturization, servo motors, stabilizers wasn't possible at that scale. $700, and now it's $20. Right? Pretty extraordinary stuff. And you'll see some videos of this this afternoon from Brad. But this is interesting. Can I drop the volume on this? This is Baxter, an industrial robot. How many of you are familiar with Baxter? Can I see a show of hands? So Baxter is an industrial robot. You move its arms to show it what to do on a stock line, and it then manages itself. It uses video processing, image recognition, and then does the job at hand. It costs $22,000, does not unionize, does not take coffee breaks, does not get sick. It's dropping in price 50% a year, right? Pretty extraordinary stuff. And the inflection point here is that in industrial robotics, we've always had to program the robot per task. And now, for the first time ever, you just literally move it. It takes about 25 minutes to teach this thing what to do. This fellow is smiling away, but actually it's about to take his job, right? And so how will we handle that? In neuroscience, I'll cover this one last technology. The inflection point that we've hit in neuroscience, because we've not had an upgrade to our brains in about 50,000 years or so. If you're using a 50,000-year-old iPhone, you would not be very happy about it. We've hardwired with a lot of old biases. The inflection point that's happened in neuroscience is the fact that we can actually image what's happening today. That's our view of the brain from before, a lump of jelly. We didn't quite know what was going on. We can today spot a single neuron firing in your brain in real time. And that feedback loop gives us an extraordinary capability, right? And what happens when you apply all of these accelerating technologies to this organ that we still fundamentally don't know how it works? We still don't know why we sleep, for example, right? Here is Interaxon, a Canadian company. That's your old EEG. Now you look at this fairly stylish-looking thing. I made a very risque joke in the Middle East. I said if with the Arabic headdress, you wouldn't even know you were wearing it. I just about got away with the joke. Kind of a dangerous thing to say out there. And today you can get pretty $100 headsets that give you a pretty good sense of what's happening in somebody's brain. The one on the right there, the iBrain, is used by Stephen Hawking, the physicist. He literally thinks of a word, and the device reads the word and speaks it out for him. You can buy these transcranial headsets that actually double your retention. If you wear this for 30 minutes, your learning retention goes up 100%. And they're training pilots with this, and they found it's an extraordinarily effective technique for depression, more effective than any of the medicines we're giving today if you can do this, right? It looks a bit ridiculous, I agree, but if you're using it for therapeutic purposes. This is another team that's kind of really taking it in a whole other level. This is a Japanese team. You go to sleep in an MRI machine, and they literally store the images coming off your visual cortex, the idea being to play your dreams back to you the next day, right? My wife wants to get her hands on this. I'm literally not so happy about that. How will we deal with that, right? And so some interesting implications come out as we deal with this. So, and we're seeing, I don't have time to go into this, we'll do that a little bit more this afternoon, but we're seeing the same explosion across all of these technologies, right? This is stress versus strain. If you're in materials engineering, you're familiar with Hooke's law, right? Which is a linear stress versus strain equation created in 1660 by Robert Hooke. For 350 years, we've been operating off that little purple area at the bottom of that curve because we didn't have the computation to go elsewhere. And over the last 5 years, we can now model further out under the curve, and we have all of that available to us. And I love this graphic because it kind of shows how explosive the new possibilities are just in material science, right? So I want to talk through, we've talked through like some of the technologies. I want to talk about the societal disruption around this because that's where the big concern from our perspective comes in. The technologies are all very sexy. They're hitting front page news all over the world. But fundamentally, we are not set up for this. All of the structures that we use to run the world, our civics, our politics, our legal systems, healthcare, education, intellectual property, you name it, every single one designed for a world a few hundred years ago, right? Not for today. Definitely not for where the world is going. We need to re-architect every single of our, one of our societal constructs to bridge into this new world. And we're seeing the stress around the world. The Arab Spring is an information revolution. The younger generation leveraging information in a way that the older generation can't even conceive of, and that's causing a lot of stress. From an entrepreneurship perspective, where you have this opportunity, we have this stress, you also have enormous opportunity, right? Peter mentioned last year that the biggest problems in the world also represent the biggest marketplaces: healthcare, energy, clean water, education, right? And today we have technologies that actually apply and bridge into that new world. So you'll hear a bit more about the Google car from Brad, who will speak next, to talk about the specific and the extraordinary power that will come from this one development. I want to play you a little video of what it's like to ride in the Google car. How many of you are familiar with the Google car? Can I show you? Right, an autonomous car drives itself. Brad will cover it a bit more. But here's a video of what it's drive. There's a little swearing in this, so bear with me as I go through this. If I could get a bit of volume for this one, please. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. All right, you get the general idea. That scream, do not forget that scream. That's the visceral scream of humanity meeting advanced technology, right? And when you first get into that car and it takes off at high speed around that obstacle course faster than you could drive it yourself, and there's nobody in the driver's seat, you freak out, right? It's a natural reaction. After about 10 minutes of driving it, it's like getting into an elevator. You press a button, it takes you where you want to go. The first reaction, though, is a freak out reaction, right? And what we're seeing around the world right now is the world is freaking out on this information paradigm. This is the Prime Minister of Turkey. So a smart, thoughtful, experienced leader around the world and totally freaking out. This is his scream, right? Going social media, major menace to society. The US completely overreacting, trying to use old structures to address new problems. Information may not want to be free, but it definitely wants to be liberated. And it's too hard to use these old structures to keep this in place. Brad, who was the chairman of the EFF, has been showing this image for about 6 years at Singularity. This is the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy in the American Constitution, warning that it's going to be wiped out because of technology. And now we're there, right? The Fourth Amendment has disappeared in the US. A fundamental pillar of American society has disappeared with no public discourse around it, right? Now, as Canadians, we don't have an expectation of privacy anyway down there, but if you're an American, a pretty bad place to be. Right? And how do you update the Constitution in this political climate? You can't. A Constitution is the software that runs the country, and we have no way of updating it. So now we're seeing this stress at a macro level and at a country level. The patent system now fundamentally broken. High-tech companies spending more on litigation than on R&D, which is a really bad place to be. I showed you the Baxter video. This is the 500,000 person Foxconn plant in China being replaced by 20,000 people and 1 million robots. those 480,000 jobs are not coming back. We've made a prediction that within 10 years, no human beings will be needed for manual labor anywhere in the world because of that acceleration in robotics. How will we deal with that from a social perspective, right? That may be the biggest concern that we have today is jobs, and how do we deal with that? Our one hope is everybody turns into makers and entrepreneurs, but actually a very small percentage of the population really has that capacity. And so we'll need to engineer some social solutions to that. And I mentioned our curriculum planning meetings. Even though we have the leading experts, thought leaders, scientists in the world coming to teach, we can't become an official, accredited, state-sanctioned university, because to do that, you have to fix your curriculum and not change it. Right? And it brings the general class of problem of how does any regulatory framework keep pace as technology is accelerating away from us? And this is the inflection point that we're seeing around the world. All of our old structures are now stressing and will start to break in the next decade or so. We're also seeing, I'll just cover this briefly, but we're seeing a huge demonetization take place. When you have an information-enabled industry, we see about a 10x drop in revenues once the internet and the full information paradigm hits. The newspaper business, the music business, Netflix versus blockbusters. And here's how badly we get it wrong. Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsystems, looked at this exponential growth in mobile phones that I mentioned, and he went and asked the question, what did the mobile industry expert analysts say would be the growth of mobile phones? So in 2002, he looked at Gartner, Forrester, Jupiter's, McKinsey's, et cetera, and found that collectively they predicted 16% year-on-year growth. 2 years later, it had gone up by 100%, so they're off by a bit. 2 years later, they predicted 14%, doubled again. Then they predicted 12%, doubled again. And in 2010, 2008, unable to spot the fact you've had 3 doublings in a row of 100%, they predicted 10%. And then it doubled again. Right? Now, how much more wrong can you be from 10% to 100%? And you're the mobile phone industry expert in that space. And Vinod was able to show this wasn't just in mobile phones. It was in network pricing. It was in solar energy. It was in bandwidth. Wherever you saw this exponential curve, the experts in the field always project linearly. And there is an enormous threat and an enormous opportunity, because if you can spot that trend, you have an enormous advantage. Because solar 3D printing, for example, has been around for 35 years, but it's been slowly doubling away. And you don't notice it when it's doubling from 0.001 to 0.00 to 0.004. When it gets to 2, 4, 6, 8 and starts taking off, everybody goes, oh, black swan. You could actually call us Black Swan University. We're kind of teaching people that, hey, there's these huge disruptive events, and how do you navigate through this area? And this last area is probably the most exciting and probably the most extraordinary for us, which is the sheer democratization of this, right? A farmer in Africa with a smartphone has more information power in his hands than Clinton did when he was president. That's an extraordinarily amazing thing to be able to say, that we go from maybe the most powerful person in the world to one of the poorest in a generation. Here's a guy who's taken this to another level, drones. He's building a drone that follows his kid to school so he does not have to walk his kid to school. And we're seeing the full democratization with all of the pros and cons around this. You can buy this online if you so choose. This is a company out of Canada. How many of you are familiar with the Arctic apple? Can I see a show of hands? So this is a great little biotech company out of BC. They found the gene in the apple that has it turn brown and turned it off. And so the apple doesn't turn brown and stays green fresh for a much longer period of time. And it's a much higher fidelity way of doing it than our old way of doing this, which is called breeding. And for thousands of generations, we've been crossing dogs and cats and horses and plants to select for the traits we want. Now we've information enabled it, right? This is Emiliano Cargiman, one of our alumni. He's been voted by our faculty the most likely to actually impact 1 billion people. He's designed nanosatellites that are about the size of a shoebox. And once he has a cluster of them up in space, he'll be able to provide real-time video anywhere on Earth to about a 1-meter resolution. His first 2 satellites have already launched. And the total cost for him doing this is about $150 to $200 million, down from, say, $5 or $10 billion to the Iridium satellites, et cetera, from a couple of decades ago. Extraordinary. He's going to open up an app store capability, and you may have seen Skylabs and some of the other companies doing similar things. You can get these $100 headsets that give you a pretty good readout as to what's happening in your brain. This is Will Henshaw. He was a guitarist for the Eurythmics, the band from the 80s, one of our alumni. That's me on the left in the silhouette. That's my brain. And he is composing music that when you play the music, puts your brain into a focused alpha state so you can get work done. You're in the zone, essentially. And this is my brain before and after he plays the music, and you can see my brain is flooded with alpha waves, right? free, mostly free service. You can go look at it. The leading expert in ADHD has found that this is more useful than any drugs for kids. Pretty extraordinary when you can have that kind of result. All from that feedback loop, we'll be able to see what's happening in the brain, right? This is a multi-gajillion-dollar idea, right? And he's doing this with a Mac and a $100 headset. Pretty extraordinary stuff. This is a 10-person lab out of LA that has solved the superbug problem for which we don't have antibiotics. And they figured out how to solve this. It's a 10-person lab. A side effect of what they were able to do allows them to solve all allergies. They can cure all allergies as a result of this. So extraordinary what people are able to do, what small teams can do today. Many of you are familiar with Eric Mijakovsky with the Pebble Watch. We put this up on Kickstarter, resulted in a $10 million funding round as a result of his Kickstarter campaign, right? The crowdfunding phenomena is phenomenal, not from the funding side, but for the first time, you can have market validation before you actually build a product. It's kind of an amazing thing to do, to be able to do, to not have to actually build a product to get market validation. And Bitcoin, if you're familiar with Bitcoin, forget Bitcoin the currency, look at the underlying protocol called a blockchain. This may be the most extraordinary thing I've seen in my entire career because it allows you to have a secure, trusted transaction on an unsecure network. And that's something we've never been able to do. There's a computer science problem called the Byzantine generals problem that hasn't been solved in 35 years, and Bitcoin accidentally solves this problem. And it will completely change the game in the next few years. So let me run through where we go next, and I'm going to wrap up. If you look at the collective zeitgeist of all of these technologies, we're seeing extraordinary stuff. I would love to see the Ontario Centers of Excellence be renamed Ontario's Crazy Entrepreneurs. Because what's going to save the world in this next decade is really the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and let me explain why. This is solar energy. It's on an exponential curve. It's doubling every couple of years in its price performance, okay? In 10 years, solar energy will make the entire Athabasca oil sands irrelevant. They're in danger now, but it'll be irrelevant. Fracking in the medium term, solar energy in the long term. Canada in the last 20 years has lost its industrial base, is now largely a resource-based economy, right? As this paradigm plays out, these accelerating technologies, graphene, other mechanisms, it'll change the economic basis of the entire economy in the next 10 years. And so we will not have a choice but to shift the economic landscape. Now, big companies aren't going to do it because all new jobs come from startups. And all risk-taking comes from startups. Big companies cannot take risk. When I was at Yahoo trying to build our brick house, we found that if you try and take extreme risk in a company, the immune system of the company will come and attack you, right? And those of you who've tried corporate innovation at that level will understand that. So therefore, the startup world is the only way to do it. It means the Western Canada will not be able to navigate this future because they're in the status quo. And they're the existing experts in that field. It'll require new entrepreneurship, leveraging new technologies. And that's what you have here. And so while we're thrilled about what we see here with Discovery, what OMERS is doing, 111, et cetera, we think you need 100 times more than that. And if you're in the innovation enablement space, because one of the great things about Canada, it actually encourages this, I would encourage you to think about two things. Take way more risk than you're taking now. Fund the entrepreneur that you think is, oh, maybe not so questionable. Every single major entrepreneur that's great has a very questionable past. Every single great one. Right? So you fund those guys or retire and let somebody else do it because we will need to take on a lot more societal risk. As I look around the world, and I travel around the world much like His Excellency does, the US cannot change the situation that they're in. They're in a structural mess because of the Constitution and the politics is stuck. Asia is stuck for different reasons. Europe in a complete mess. Canada not just has the opportunity, but I think the obligation to think about and create the structures for this new world. The practical common sense approach is what we need here. So with that, please think about go do crazy things, right? Thank you very much for having us here. So let me introduce you. So,
my time, Salim, so don't do this.
So, Brad Templeton, as we introduced him earlier, is our head of networks and computing. He was the chairman of the FF. As an engineer at Waterloo, he put the dot into .com. So in terms of impacting 1 billion people, Brad Templeton, welcome.
Thank you. In a strange, ironic twist, in fact, my first summer job as a teenager was groundskeeper at the new CN Tower, where I picked up the garbage and mowed the grass literally right underneath where we're standing. So that's a little bit bizarre. Well, things are a bit different today. And I want to talk to you about a technology that I've been working on, which I think is going to have a dramatic change to the world. Cars that drive themselves, and they change transportation, but so much more than transportation. I'm going to cover for you 5 different pillars of society I think will be changed dramatically by this. Now, the most important is saving lives, but there are actually huge effects from energy to our cities and how we do parking and manage our land, to congestion, and also to retailing and delivery and all the other aspects of what a city is like. Now, saving lives should be enough to understand a technology like this, because we see 1.2 million people around the world die every year because humans are not very good drivers. They cause huge amounts of accidents, and they kill not just those millions of people, but injure far more. In the United States, the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency worked out a cost for accidents of $230 billion. Now, if you work that out per mile, it's about 8 cents a mile, which is about the same price as the gasoline in a Prius. And in California, you're legally required to drive the Prius. But think about that. Paying more for your share of the cost of accidents than you're paying for your gasoline in a car like that. Also, that country drives every year 50 billion hours doing this. The whole country only works 240 billion hours. In Canada, they do a little better. 2,000 Canadians, though, killed every year on the roads, 150,000 injured. And that's just a little bit less, actually, than the United States on a per-kilometer basis. So we can't get too smug here. Now, 40% of those accidents come from drinking. And one thing that's nice about robots is they very rarely drink. 80% of those accidents come from inattention, and actually that's also something computers are pretty good at doing. They don't not look. They have this unblinking stare, which we don't like when it's the NSA, but we like it when it's a car that's driving for us. We lose a lot of our lives to congestion, and we've given over huge amounts of our city. Now, LA is not the poster child, but more than half the land in Los Angeles belongs to the car. It's driveways and garages and parking lots and streets. 25% of the entire energy budget of rich countries like the US and Canada goes to personal transportation, and about 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions. Here's my favorite statistic. As a planet, every year we are driving 1.7 light years. Now, how often do you get to use light years in your work if you're not an astronomer? So let's take a look at the reality, why this is not science fiction, why this is happening. This is, as they like to say in Silicon Valley, garage innovation, finally taking place in garages. But this is not AI of the sort that has to be as smart as a human. It's more like being as smart as a horse, or even being as smart as a bug, something that we can achieve. So 10 years ago, the American military held a series of contests to build the first generation of self-driving cars. And the first contest was a complete failure. Nobody got more than about 7 kilometers. My friend Anthony entered a motorcycle, which he forgot to turn on at the beginning. But the second contest had 5 cars complete a 150-mile course through the California desert, cars that were empty, going down desert roads and windy mountain ravines, all without much money at all, because the prize was only $2 million and the teams didn't spend that much. Well, Google was smart, and they hired the team that won this contest from Stanford, and they hired the people that won the contest after it to produce the next generation of vehicle. Here you'll actually see Chris Urmson, the chief engineer of the Google project, pushing the button on the car. Chris is Canadian, by the way, so we're everywhere. And here's the car driving, as it has done now for over 700,000 miles on urban streets and highways in California, stopping at lights, making left turns, avoiding pedestrians. Google has thanked these people for participating in its research. Seeing very differently from a human being in all directions, 360 degrees all the time, not the way a human sees, not the way a human drives. So in that course, they've gone down the streets of busy urban centers like San Francisco and dealing with left turns, dealing with joggers and stop signs and things like that, running down through the toll gates here on the Golden Gate Bridge, which I'm sure some of you have done, going down the entire coast of California. Here you see the pretty town of Monterey, driving along windy mountain roads, dealing with things that scare even human drivers as they're coming along, seeing the same night or day, which is actually pretty handy sometimes. Going down even, this is a little tourist attraction, the windiest street in the world called Lombard Street. This is sped up a bit. I don't actually recommend Lombard Street at this speed. but it's an example of what you can do. They've also done hard problems like merging onto a busy freeway. At Stanford, they actually taught their car to park in a way I don't recommend that you park. You can buy today a remarkable amount of stuff. You can buy cars that will park themselves, keep themselves in the lane, keep themselves a fixed distance from the car in front of them, see if you're going to hit a pedestrian or another car, hit the brakes for you. That's all in the showrooms today. But all the car companies have announcements of what they're doing. Audi's been showing their car driving in the highways of Las Vegas at CES. Tesla, after Google announced that they would have a car out probably in 2017, Tesla, because Elon Musk, the head of Tesla, has the largest testicles in Silicon Valley, announced they would have a car in 2016. Volvo has done a project where they have 100 cars in Gothenburg, and they've also built a convoy project where people can follow a truck down the road. Nissan has opened a lab across the highway from us, across the runway from us, and they have promised they will be selling cars in 2020 that can drive themselves. Daimler, Mercedes, has a car you can buy today, the 2014 S-Class, which will drive itself in a traffic jam, and they have also said they will sell full self-driving cars in 2020. BMW has a very good project going out. Ford has just started up a project with their vehicles. This company in France called Induct is actually selling this vehicle today. It has no steering wheel, and it is meant to be a shuttle on campuses, so it can move people from place to place, summoned by a cell phone on campuses. Not a science fiction future product. This is something they are selling today. This is a video, let's get the audio up, of Google's car in action.
Here we go. Away we go. Look, Ma, no hands. No hands anywhere. No hands, no feet. No hands, no feet, no nothing.
So this is the first civilian to use the car.
Yep. Car's using radars and laser to check and make sure there's nothing coming either way. I find myself looking. Old habits die hard, man. Hey, they don't die. Right, well, let's go get a taco at the drive-thru. And we're turning into the parking lot. How neat. There we go. Now we kind of creep along here. Does anybody have any money? I've got money. No, I've got my wallet right here.
.95% of my vision is gone. I'm well past legally blind.
So as you can see, not just the able-bodied people have something to gain from this. There are millions of people who have disabilities that stop giving them the freedom of transportation that we take for granted. And when I refer to those people, I mean all of you when you get older. You will lose these abilities as well, and this technology will stop you from losing your freedom of transportation. Here's a video that was just released actually a couple weeks ago about Google's project working in urban situations. Here you can see it, for example, detecting traffic cones in a construction zone and avoiding them. You can also see it detecting a bicyclist making a hand signal in order to turn left and move in front of the vehicle, and sees the hand go out, sees the bicyclist go out. The bicyclist is a wimp and decides to abort their particular trip. So this is advancing quite a bit, and the number of miles of real driving is increasing. So how does this work? Why is this a way for programmers to save the world? I'll very briefly touch on the technology. On top of the car, you saw a spinning sensor. This is a research device that is currently getting much smaller and cheaper. But every 10 times a second, it is sending out laser beams that scan the world, and it works like a radar except with light. And so you get this 360-degree picture of the world in all directions in full 3D, not the fake 3D you do with your own eyes. And this gives the vehicle the ability to see all obstacles and make sure it's not going to hit anything, and that's kind of the goal. Now, there are other sensors. There's radar, which is able to see how fast things are going and see through fog, which is nice. There is a GPS in the car, but the GPS is not used to drive. Any of you who've tried to drive from the GPS would know why. It's just good to know what street you're on, not exactly where you are. The other sensors do that job. So imagine a world a little bit more in the future where it's not a little Prius coming up to you, but a vehicle designed for travel. You pick up your cell phone, you say you want to travel somewhere, and within a minute, something pulls up to you. And it's a vehicle which has a desk or a screen or other features which allow you to actually work or play or live your life. So it's like being teleported because it doesn't take time out of your day. All happening without central control, all happening without new infrastructure, which is very interesting. This has several consequences. Driving you around is just one of them. It turns out vehicles that can move on their own, that can move empty, are also vehicles that can deliver themselves, they're vehicles that can refuel and recharge themselves, and they're vehicles that can park and store themselves. Now this actually has huge consequences for energy and the car industry. And the reason is that today, when people go to buy a car, they ask one question in the showroom. What car do I need for my life? They want a car. If they ski three times a year, they get this big SUV. If they move cargo twice a year, they buy one of the #1 selling cars in our society, the F-150 pickup. But let's change this around. When you're summoning a car on demand, you ask a very different question than what car do I need for my life, and you don't have to buy this multi-purpose vehicle that does everything you want it to do. You ask, what car do I need today? What car do I need for this trip? And the answer to that is remarkably different, because most trips are actually you alone, and you're just going across town. That's actually most of the travel you do in that big 5-passenger sedan that you came here in today. And that makes a huge difference for how much energy we use for transportation. So much so, in fact, that we could reduce the amount of fuel that's used, the amount of CO2 used by huge amounts. The United States would no longer need to import oil from overseas. It would still have to buy from Canada, so you can rest a little easier. But the United States has this pesky habit of going to war over the oil it needs from overseas. You've probably seen that. It's a very bad habit, and they should be broken of it. And the idea that software can do that is quite remarkable. Cars, or robots at least, don't care how convenient it is to refuel or recharge. And that allows you to use all these alternative fuels which face this barrier because people can't tolerate the idea that they might have to take a long recharge or might have to drive a long distance to get an alternate fuel. So, this also has interesting policy consequences. At first, when I started giving these talks, I went around saying, we don't know if the governments are going to legalize this. It could be decades before they get around. The reverse has actually happened. 4 states and the District of Columbia in the United States have actually passed laws to enable the technology. This is the first Nevada license plate for such vehicles. We're going to see competition between countries that want to be the center of this new auto industry. Singapore, China, India, Israel, they will all compete and try and lead this way. The United States governments are actually waking up in advance, which surprises me. And we're going to see lots of lobbying. We're going to see people with children who don't want to drive them to practice all the time. We're going to see drunk people who want to get wasted and be able to get home easily without worrying about a DUI. And of course, Jews love this vehicle because there's nothing Jews enjoy more than arguing about whether it's legal to ride in a car like this on Saturday or not. Nothing is perfect, though. This world might result in the Wall-E world, where we don't walk anymore to places. That could be a bad sign. And it doesn't have to be green. Instead of a tiny little vehicle that's very efficient, you could ask for an RV to follow you everywhere you go. In fact, why should you have only one RV? Why not have 6 RVs follow you everywhere you go and dock and form a house in the parking lot? You could do it. It's not particularly green, but it's possible, and so you have to worry about how people will abuse everything. And let's face it, the military started this, and they have other plans, non-civilian plans for this technology that we should worry about. We also have to worry about how it's going to change our cities. It might increase our sprawl or get rid of it. It's a very difficult thing to predict. We also have to worry about the consequences to our freedom. If you remember the movie Minority Report, Tom Cruise is riding around in a car like this. This movie pretends it's about psychics predicting the future, but it's really about cars that drive themselves, of course. And in this movie, his car is driving along, and the car says, you have a new destination. The new destination is the jail. Well, the police would like a car that does that and betrays you and takes you to jail, but you might not like that. And there are barriers to this becoming possible. I mean, there is a fear that people have. For whatever reason, people don't like being killed by robots. And they'd rather be killed by drunks, which is what's happening today. But that's a choice we'll actually have to make as society, whether or not we let cars have accidents, because nothing will be perfect and they will have accidents. And these cars will hurt people, but they'll hurt fewer people than the driving that we're doing today is doing. And we as a society will have to get over our fear of the machine if we want this to happen. There are other people who could get in the way, a profession in the lower left-hand corner, I won't name them, as well as, of course, the fact that there is programming that needs to be done. But let me tell you why I get really excited. Because this brings that curve of Moore's law that Salim showed you, that constantly increasing, doubling exponential curve to transportation. The computer becomes the most important part of the car, not the engine, not the looks. The system that drives it will be the most important part of the car. And because of that, that important part, that's on the Moore's Law curve. That's the thing that's getting better at the rate that software and networks and computers have been getting better, while the rest of the car stays the same. We will have transportation and innovation that's bought by early adopters. Now, early adopters are stupid people with too much money, basically. They will go out and buy the 5S of something just a few months after they bought the 5 under contract. I see some people in the room who've done it. But they're wonderful people because they buy these new technologies, perhaps irrationally, and get them into the market and fund the innovation and development of these technologies. Compare that to how we've done transportation in the past with municipal administrators. I apologize to the municipal administrators in the room. You're lovely people, but you're not early adopters. You can't. It's not the way your job works. It's not how you're paid to do it. So technologies that are sold from the bottom up with innovation and early adoption compared to technologies that are designed from the top down, there's no contest in my mind if you want to know which one to bet on. Now, the question we should ask ourselves, though, is, will this technology get adopted at the speed that old industrial technologies got adopted? You know, like electric cars, which are actually 100 years old? Or will it be adopted at the speed we've seen for things like smartphones, like the iPhone, where it appears and suddenly the people in Waterloo are completely ignoring it and it takes over their marketplace in a few years? I'm sorry, I went to school with those guys at REM. They're great guys, but they missed this. And this can come on so quickly. It can surprise you in amazing ways. I believe it's going to be closer to the iPhone than it was to the electric car. Now, this is a very important question for Ontario. And the reason is that I think that when you have disruptive technology like this, the old players rarely survive the shift to the new style of technology. And the big companies, the Fords and GMs, even the Toyotas, even the Mercedes-Benz, which is currently the leading car company in this area, these companies may not survive to the next round, which means we may see the auto industry go away as it existed today. Now, that's a big part of the Ontario economy. However, Ontario has a big advantage over Michigan, which I think Michigan is doomed. So sorry, Michigan. Ontario has a chance because Ontario is a high-tech sector, too. You can recruit top people to come and work in Toronto. You can't do that to do in Detroit. But this is going to take a real serious effort if Ontario wants to maintain the part of its economy that has come from automotive in the past. That's a new thing they added to the Ford building, that little sign there saying they're no relation to someone else named Ford. Now, these vehicles, as I mentioned, they don't have to park. They actually can do what's legally called standing, which means that they can move out of the way if they're in front of a fire hydrant or a driveway. And what that means is we don't need all these parking lots that we have built. We actually have enough capacity to store the smaller number of cars we'll have when they're in taxi mode, dropping you off and picking someone else. And with that capacity, we can actually reclaim huge amounts of land in our cities. My dream is that occasionally we'll turn parking lots into parkland. I know mostly they'll be turned into office complexes and new roads, but occasionally this will happen. That will be nice. It's a bonanza, actually, for our cities to see that much land suddenly become available. The most important element of real estate, as everyone knows, is location, location, and location. And that means that we're going to see a giant change in the value of real estate as location becomes different. We also have the ability to reduce the amount of traffic we spend our time in. I don't have time to cover that in great detail. But I will tell you one thing. In our society, today we have one vital product so important, so vital to our lives that you must be able to get it no matter where you are in 30 minutes or less. What if you can get anything in 30 minutes, not just a pizza? What if you have delivery robots that can bring you anything for a few cents a kilometer? What does that mean for retailing? Walmart has destroyed small retailers. Now Walmart will fall prey to online retailers like Amazon that can get you everything you want in a very short amount of time. So the way cities are designed for retailing is also going to change. I believe that the time is now for a resolve that kind of parallels Apollo, and that this nation should commit itself, before this decade is out, to a computer driving a man to lunch at noon and returning him safely to work. Okay, not a great, well. But John F. Kennedy said something else about the moon launch. He said that some projects are worth doing not just because they're easy, but because they're hard. And this is one of those projects which is hard but not intractable, but has this ability to have an immense change on our society, which is why I'm working on it and why other people are working on it as well. So I think we're going to see a remarkable change to transportation, the very core of what cities are, and thus we'll see a big change to cities as well. So thank you very much.
Brad Templeton. And
So we'll invite Salim back. We're going to do some Q&A with you now.
yeah, and I want to point out that what you heard from Brad is kind of an in-depth look at one area. If you roll that across the 35 or 40 different breakthroughs that we're seeing with the same kind of depth of impact, what does that do? And this project may be the biggest change that we see in society in our lifetimes, right? Because it'll shift completely the way we think about society. My 3-year-old will probably never learn how to drive.
So this afternoon, later on, both Salim and I will be in the Discovery Theater where we're going to get into more depth on a whole bunch of other topics, robotics and AI and biotech and some other topics. So you can ask about those later as well, but we're open to questions now. There may be some questions that came via the texting, but I prefer to talk to you in person, so if you'll come up to the microphone, or are you all completely beaten into a stupor? I see some folks at the mic there.
Question there. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes for questions. Go ahead.
Blair Adamak, I won't stick the name of my employer. In 31 days, we're voting for a choice of 3 politicians who have pledged to restore manufacturing jobs. How do we get them to think 10 years ahead and not 5 years ahead?
Wait a minute, you said politicians, right? Well, that's incredibly challenging. I mean, politicians, of course, are looking towards the next election, which can come at any time. And this is a problem. Do you have an answer for that? Because I don't know how to change their minds.
I do. One of the issues, and we're starting to work with governments a lot right now, all policy today is formulated defensively and reactively, right? And we actually need to formulate it proactively and aggressively to look forward to where the puck is going to be, rather than trying to look at it defensively and wait till something happens and then try and react. And we actually ran a workshop, Brad and I and a couple of other faculty, along with Deloitte, 3 months ago, where we brought together 100 or so of the most influential Canadians together and asked them, how will you deal with this future as we bridge into this? Right? And so we're looking at trying to do that with governments, but it's hard if you're in government to deal with that because, again, you're dealing with re-elections, et cetera. And it's one of the structural issues we have with democracy is we're geared towards short-term, high metabolism thinking. Nobody's really thinking about the long term, at least not enough. But things like OCE are critical elements for things like that.
Yeah, the MPPs don't understand this, but the manufacturing jobs that went away, they're not coming back in the way they were. It's going to be humans working together with machines. Even as Salim pointed out in China, the Foxconn company that makes the iPhones, that company has bought, 1 million or 500,000 robots. It plans to replace a lot of their Chinese workers, the ones you thought were so cheap and out-competing North American workers. They are getting replaced by robots. That's actually good news here because the robots cost the same to the Chinese as they cost to people in Ontario. And so if you've got the know-how, you can make it happen. Next question. I think is that mic the only one that's got a line there?
I think so.
Oh, we have one here.
Hello. Hi, Jeff Tracy, Venus Cybersecurity Corporation. You mentioned a lot of interesting technologies that are going to make our lives easier and make everybody's lives much more straightforward and easy. You've only mentioned once or twice in your presentations, both of you, the element of cybersecurity around the technologies. How do you envision that technology being developed in terms of protecting those?
It's maybe one of the biggest concerns we have because as we digitize things, they become hackable, right? And our faculty for the track that we have called Policy, Law, and Ethics is Mark Goodman, who's actually the futurist for the FBI. So he has like some amazing stories and scary stories to talk. And he thinks about how do terrorists and criminals use these technologies unfettered by regulatory and ethical concerns. It's one of the biggest concerns. The reason that we're optimistic in general is that when we found that a technology gets opened up like the internet, if you take eBay or Craigslist, you can do a fraudulent transactions as easily as you can a constructive transaction. The ratio, sociologists have looked at this, the ratio between positive and negative is something like 10,000 to 1. Right? And so the vast majority of people do positive things with technology. The problem that we're facing is the amplitude of the negatives growing. We're trying to deal with that. So we actually work with the CIA, the Department of Defense, security agencies around the world to think about how to look at this future, but there's no easy answer.
So I actually give a long lecture on security and privacy topics during the regular program that we don't have time for. I actually think, though, the central question you ask is a mystery. I know how vulnerable our networks and computers are, and they're tremendously vulnerable. And the amazing question I ask myself every day is, why does the world work? Why is it still working so well, and we're doing so much commerce and having such a good time and being so productive? And remarkably, it is because most people are good. Now, those few bad actors can multiply their effects. Some of you may not know that there's a thing called a botnet where someone else has taken over your computer and they are using it to send spam and do denial of service attacks. And over 30% of PCs are in these botnets. So I want you to look to the person on your right and the person on your left, and it's not one of them, it's you. You're the one sending me all that spam I got, so I'm very annoyed at you. However, we do have to rethink our computer architectures. There's no question in my mind.
Right.
Next question.
Last question.
Hi, Naomi Cohen, representing Ryerson's ADAPT program. Salim, fashion analysts say that bald is the new afro, so I think you'll be fine. Alrighty, you've shared so much on all of the changes that have happened, and with the woolly mammoth joining us very soon, how has Singularity looked into preparing our next generation, especially at the elementary level, in public education for these changes?
So for the educational side, we started with graduate students because...
but just one interruption, by the way. We actually do have more time. We can have another questions. So
no, we don't. The clock is wrong.
Clock is
so,
wrong. Okay.
I'm getting the hook from over here. Technology always, our favorite joke, actually it's Brad's joke, is that AI is really easy, but AV is really hard. So there we go. For your answer, from an educational perspective, we focused and we started with graduate level because having a graduate degree gives you an academic rigor and ability to absorb the fire hose of information. The kind of density you heard in our talks is what our summer students go through for 70 days. Right? So it's a pretty intense program. We are looking now at how do you roll this down to younger children, and most interestingly, if you look at the age group 8 to 11, it seems to be the right age to get a kid inspired about technology. Once you get into the teen years, their hormones are driving them for 5 or 6 years, you kind of lost them anyway. But in terms of the younger kids, it's a critical element. Our approach was first let's go with the graduate students and when we select, we have 4,000 applicants from 120 countries fighting over 80 slots every summer. Right? I mean, it's one of those where if I applied, I never get in type of thing. And we're looking for who will be running these countries in the next 10 or 20 years. So that's our first effort. The second thing we're doing is saying, okay, let's have them launch projects that demonstrate and inspire this new future so that we can get that out there, because we think you learn best by actually doing. And so we try and get them to launch projects and push the edge of this so that we can have a nuanced discussion about robotic cars and not the freak-out discussion in the video that I showed you, right? And then the third level is now we're looking at where do we get to younger and younger students. We don't have a clear grasp on that yet. Our programs don't lend themselves to an online environment as easily as we could, although we've released a lot of our lectures for free online.
Yeah, I will say, by the way, one topic we track quite intensively is the potential for AI to actually get involved in education and build systems that can actually teach children through computers in a way that understands how the child is doing, understands what they're having trouble with, what they're moving forward. You're already seeing in a number of efforts from Sal Khan at the Khan Academy, Coursera and Udacity, which is founded by Sebastian Thrun, who I worked with on this Google Car project, to build new types of education which flip the way education is done, having the lectures be on videotape from the best lecturers possible, and then having the personal guidance from the teacher be one at a time with the students rather than the other way around. Well, we think this model is going to be expanded when AI is actually able to give students personal guidance, and the slogan becomes one teacher per child, not one laptop per child, if you're familiar with that project, but one teacher per child. And this is something that might come into fruition probably within another decade.
And just in terms of that, if we went back 10 years ago, we had about 400 million connected devices on the internet. Okay? Today we have 8 billion connected devices. By the end of this decade, it'll be 50 billion. And then about a decade after, we'll get to 1 trillion. Right? So we think we're 30, 40 years into the information revolution. On that metric, from going from 8 billion to 1 trillion, we're about 1% of the way there. And literally, all these 5 billion people that are coming online will have one of these. This is the Canadian Akash Indian tablet. That's a 1 gig Android tablet with a phone, and it's $35. It's dropping in price 50% a year. Right? In a few years, we'll be giving these out in cereal boxes because you will not be able to sell anything to those 5 billion people online without one of these. And that's the biggest marketplace mankind has ever seen, 3 billion new minds coming online by the end of this decade. You want to talk about an entrepreneurial opportunity, that's it. Right?
Well, Tom is standing there with the hook, I believe, so thank you very much for your attention.
We'll see you this afternoon. Thanks, man.
Good.
Let me just give this back to the...
All right, great. Thank you, Brad and Salim, for enlightening us about new ways to think about the world and the future of technology. You presented us with some amazing ideas and challenges that will no doubt play a huge role in shaping our future, including how we work and play, the way we think about ourselves, and how we can contribute to making this a better world. This has been an excellent beginning to this year's Discovery. I'm now honored to introduce Deputy General Yu Sung Yong, who will say a few words on behalf of our delegates from China. Please join me in welcoming Deputy General Yong.
大家下午好，很高兴参加 Discover 大会。我代表中国科技部火炬中心和中国的各位参会代表，对大会的召开表示衷心的祝贺。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased and honored to attend Discovery Conference on behalf of the Torch Center of the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology and on behalf of the entire Chinese delegation. I'd like to extend sincere congratulations on the successful opening of the conference.
在创新全球化的背景下，知识创造、技术创新和产业革命不断取得新的突破。刚才我们已经感受到了，中国作为最大的发展中国家，经过30多年的改革开放，努力向发达国家学习，充分借鉴经济发展和科技创新的经验。中国与世界100多个国家签有科技合作协议。科技部火炬中心与几十个国际创新组织和机构有创新的合作，中加两国的科技合作也在不断的加强。
In today's world of innovation globalization, new breakthroughs are being made every day in terms of knowledge creation, technology innovation, and industrial revolution. China, the world's largest developing country, has been following the policy of reform and opening up for 30 years. We have been very eager to learn from developed countries in terms of advanced practices of economic development and science technology innovation. China has scientific cooperation agreements with over 100 countries around the world. And our Torch Center has partnership with innovation organizations, with tens of innovation organizations around the world. And the cooperation between China and Canada has become stronger than ever.
Discover 大会是加拿大重要的创新展示平台、创新交流平台，也是中国科技部与安大略省创新合作的重要平台。今天的大会汇集了加拿大不同领域的前沿技术、科技成果和高科技产品，汇集了中加两国大学和研究机构、技术转移机构、产业界、创业企业、投资机构以及政府部门的优秀代表。
The Discovery Conference is a premium platform in Canada for innovation exhibition and exchange. It is also an important platform for innovation cooperation between China's Ministry of Science and Technology and the Ontario government. Today's conference showcases cutting-edge technologies, R&D achievements, and high-tech products across different sectors in Canada. It brings together universities, research institutes, startups, investors from both countries.
我们衷心的希望中加双方要深入交流、洽谈合作、互利共赢。加拿大创新资源丰厚，创新能力强。中国有市场、有需求、有机会。我们希望通过人才的交流、技术转移、合作研发、孵化创业等方式，将加拿大领先的技术扩散、转化到中国。我们也鼓励中国的企业在加拿大投资。希望和成效在于我们的共同努力。
We hope China and Canada can deepen cooperation exchanges to achieve mutually beneficial cooperation. We hope that through talent exchange, technology transfer, joint research, and investment, we can bring advanced technologies from Canada to China. We also encourage Chinese companies to invest here. With our joint efforts, I believe we will unleash huge potential and make more achievements.
最后，祝愿本届 Discover 大会取得圆满成功，谢谢大家。
Finally, I wish the Discovery Conference a complete success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy General Liang. On behalf of OCE's Board of Directors, I want to say how much we value your comments and your participation in Discovery this year. We're also very pleased to have here at Discovery partners from Alberta representing our recently announced Alberta-Ontario Innovation Program, and we also have partners from Quebec who OCE is working with on the Ontario-Quebec Life Sciences Corridor Initiative. Let me now take this opportunity to acknowledge the generous support of our sponsors, In particular, I want to thank OMERS for sponsoring the Young Entrepreneurs Zone, the University of Waterloo sponsoring our Ask an Expert area, AMD for sponsoring our lunch on day 2 of Discovery, Deloitte for helping us bring Singularity University to Discovery, and IBM for sponsoring the Big Data Analytics Zone. I'm now pleased to announce the opening of the show floor. If you haven't yet, please sign on to Twitter and let your followers know what's going on at this year's Discovery by using the hashtag OCE Discovery. And I look forward to seeing you all again this evening. Thank you very much.